our Earth, our rights, and our responsibilities. The Earth should be important to all of us, as we all dwell upon the same planet and share many things in common, such as being of the same species, breathing the same air, eating produce from the same soil, and drinking and bathing in the same substance we all know as H2O. One would hope we would treat the Earth that provides us with all these amenities with the utmost importance and respect. But for most, this is not the case. As we continue to treat the Earth the way we have for many years, we start to see the growing effects of climate change. So, what are the threats to rights posed by climate change? While the global climate crisis does ultimately affect us all, many Indigenous cultures see the Earth as an extension of themselves and have contributed very little to the global climate crisis due to their typically low carbon footprints. Yet, Indigenous cultures still are currently and will further suffer the consequences of climate change. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights, or the UDHR, is aimed to protect all human beings' rights. However, because it was developed and influenced by Western normatives, it lacks the support required for Indigenous peoples. Thus, they developed the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, or UNDRIP. However, climate change poses a threat to many of the rights in both the UDHR and UNDRIP. Pearl noted that the right to health is particularly at risk due to climate change because of carbon emissions. Carbon dioxide, though produced naturally in some cases, is heavily produced by the burning of fossil fuels such as petrol, and therefore is primarily an issue contributed to by Western countries. Though it may linger in the atmosphere for some time, it also may be absorbed by plant life or the ocean. This can result in the acidification of the ocean, and due to the forestry industry, there is a decrease in the amount of plants which can process carbon dioxide into oxygen. Issues of spoiled land comes not only from carbon pollution, but also the dumping of waste. UNDRIP specifies that for Indigenous people especially, they have a right to the conservation and protection of the environment, their lands, territories, and resources. But for Indigenous peoples who too have a right to an adequate living standard for their health and well-being, climate change strips this right away from them. These effects of climate change impact all Earth dwellers of all cultures, but many westernized cultures use the Earth as a means of profit and personal gain and are larger contributors to the issue. Though this may appear to be true, we all share a responsibility as we all suffer the consequences together. When we look at New Zealand in particular, one would think that the carbon emissions from our little country could not compare against countries like China, the USA, Russia, Germany, and the UK. However, our worldindata.org has identified that in the year of 2020, New Zealand contributed 6.94 metric tonnes of CO2 emissions to the global climate crisis. This comes in at just less than half of what the United States weighed in, only 0.47 metric tonnes less than China, and actually 2.09 metric tonnes more than the UK in the same year. When we look at it this way and see just how much we're contributing to the issue, it becomes very clear that we do play a large part in the global climate crisis. This brings about the question, to what extent do New Zealanders have a responsibility to address these threats? Now that we can see just how much we contribute to this issue, we can understand that we do have a responsibility. As we are a Pacific nation with an extremely coastal structure, climate change has the potential to bring about detrimental, irreversible consequences that will most likely affect us sooner than many other inland countries. Some of these consequences, such as extreme weather, are already evident, with severe flooding in Nelson resulting in major land deterioration. In the past, we have also seen extreme weather affecting some of our surrounding Pacific nations, such as the 2012 Fiji floods and the 2011 Tuvalu drought. We should see these as early warning signs and use them to urge authorities to develop adaptive strategies in order to address the risks of climate change and avoid the consequences of extreme weather. We are also a country built on Indigenous grounds, and that brings about a responsibility to prolong some of this Indigenous culture's most valuable possessions, the land. Our own Indigenous people, Māori, identify as tangata whenua, or people of the land, and that alone displays the connectedness that Māori feel to the natural world, and especially to the lands, waters, and sacred places of their ancestors. In Māori culture, the legend of Papatūānuku and Ranginui has been passed on for generations, and in it the gods of land and sky are spoken about as if they were living and breathing people. This is a trend among many Māori legends and paints a clear picture of the pedestal they place the natural world on. The landscape and location of our country, as well as our own cultural connectedness to the natural world, are some of the most important reasons we as New Zealanders have a personal connection to climate change and therefore an urgency to address it. So, who is responsible and who do we hold accountable? While we all play a part and we all share a responsibility, there are certain organisations who can push our nation's government to make a change and address these issues. Amnesty International is a non-governmental organisation that reports when governments violate human rights and how well they adhere to UDHR and UNDRIP. This pressure applied by Amnesty International can often enforce change by the government, but is also helpful to look at to see how well each nation is following these guidelines. The Indigenous Environmental Network is also a non-governmental organisation that has set out to address environmental and economic justice issues with a focus on protecting Indigenous lands as well as water, air, natural resources, and the health of Indigenous people and all living things. You can do your part in supporting both of these organisations by either donating at the links below or spreading the word about the work these organisations do. And remember that this is our earth, these are our rights, and so this is our responsibility.